Good morning. This is the lesson 2 in complex numbers. In the last lesson, we learned that what we mean by a complex number is we give a meaning to this quantity square root of -1, which we interpret as j, and then the numbers with these negative square roots we can interpret as complex numbers. Now, a complex number normally will have a real part and an imaginary part. Say, for example, 2 plus j3, or we can simply say a complex number can be just j4 or minus j5 or something like that. That's only a imaginary part. So that's the real part and that's the imaginary part. Another very important thing we should know about complex numbers is what we call a complex conjugate. Complex conjugate. Now, if we have a complex number, for example, like the one shown above, 2 plus j3, the conjugate of this number is 2 minus j3. So that is, we simply change the sign of the complex, the imaginary part. We simply change the sign of the imaginary part. So we'll take another example. Say, suppose we have a complex number -3 plus j4, then the conjugate of that will be -3 minus j4. So this is the conjugate, the earlier one. And if we take a further example, say we take a complex number of say 3 minus 7 j7. That's the number. The conjugate of that is -3 plus j7. That's a very interesting complex numbers and their conjugates. If you multiply a complex number with its conjugate number by its conjugate, then you get a real number, which we will explore now. So if you take we'll take the first two numbers here. So let's take this as say 2 plus j3 multiplied by 2 minus j3. So that gives us, when you multiply by, when you multiply 2 by 2, that's 4. And then when you multiply this by that, that will be plus j6. And then multiply, when you multiply this by that, that will be minus j6. And when you multiply this by that, that will be minus j squared 9. So you can see these two gets cancelled, and it is 4 minus j squared is -1. So negative, that is positive. So we will have, I'll write it clearly. So minus j squared is -1 and 9. So that gives us 4. Negative times negative, that is positive. So plus 9. So the answer is 13. So we can take the second example above. The number is -3 plus j4, and the conjugate is minus 3 minus J4. So that's the complex number, and that's the conjugate. Right. When you multiply this, that is minus 3 plus J4 multiplied by minus 3 minus J4, that gives us, say, when you multiply this by that, that is minus 3 times minus 3, which is plus 9, and then when you multiply this by that, that is minus 12, J12, and then when you multiply this by that, that is plus J12, and then when you multiply this by that, that is minus J squared 16. So that gives us 9. These two gets cancelled, minus J squared 16, which is 9 minus, this is minus 1, and 16. So that gives us 9 plus 16, which is 25. So the product of a complex number and its conjugate, complex number and its conjugate, will yield to a real number.